residential portion, and when that happens, they will come back and replat. And as the applicant's representative said, we did have the discussion about dedicating the 33 feet of right-of-way in Lot 2 on the northern portion of it, and they agreed. They did agree to that. So staff recommends approval of the final plat, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for Mr. Josephson this morning? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else on the commission wish to make comment? Being none, although we will close public portion of this hearing, and I would ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of the Come and Go Edition subdivision final plat as depicted in Exhibit A, as meeting all the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code, also being in the interest of the public health, safety, and welfare, with the condition that the one-half street dedication is included in the final plat.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
A second to that motion. Any further discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Recommend approval. Thank you very much. Go to item 3 on our regular agenda, which would be a final plat. It's to consider a final plat for the Great Lakes First Subdivision. The site is generally located in the northwest quarter of Section 15, Township 140 North, Range 96 West. It's approximately 139.22 acres. This time I'd ask the party presenting, please feel free to come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Andrew Schrank with Highlands Engineering and Surveying, representing the client of Great Lakes First Subdivision. Just to refresh your memory, give you a little history on this project. This is a replat of the existing BK subdivision. It also includes a 15-acre parcel along Highway 22. We came back and we rezoned this property to commercial and industrial zoning. At one point, we'd also shown a rural residential buffer at the southeast corner of this property. We have removed that and are showing an 8-foot earthen berm in place of that per comments received at the last meeting. A couple notes on the approaches to the site. We are working with the North Dakota DOT on the access onto Highway 22. We have received a verbal from them that this location is okay. We've submitted an approach application. We're just waiting for insurance from the landowner to get submitted to the DOT for that approval. I also had a discussion with Al Heiser regarding approaches onto 32nd Street. He was okay with the connection point of the right-of-way we're showing. The access to lots 1 through 3 of Block 1 in the northwest corner. Between lots 1 and 2, we'll have a shared access or approach to those 2 lots. And we'll place that in the northwest corner of Lot 2. That is one minor change I'd like to make, is to add an access easement for that approach at the northwest corner of Lot 2. Lot 3 would have access from its northeast corner, and Mr. Heiser was okay with all those locations. I guess I'm here to address any further questions the board may have.
Anyone have any questions or comments for Mr. Schrank at this time?
Mr. Chairman, I have one. Andrew, who's going to be responsible for the maintenance of that earthen berm in the future?
In the development agreement, it spells out that that will be the landowners. So once the property is purchased, those landowners would maintain that area.
What do you plan on doing with that earthen berm?
It'll be seeded. We have in the agreement that they can't store materials in there or anything like that. It'll just be a landscape berm in that area. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments?
Is that Andrew? Does the street going on to 22, does that line up with an approach on the west side?
It does.
Okay.
The Solar Bee entrance is directly west of that approach, and there is an existing residence within Lot 9 of Block 2 right now, and that has an approach to it that we will be removing once we construct this new approach.
What about paving of the streets? I think we made it clear in the past that we'll expect the streets to be paved. What's the plan there?
We do have a street section in our development agreement, and it is an asphalt paved section. I believe it's 5 inches of asphalt over 8 inches of base, so the street will be paved.
How are we for staff, how are we assuring that that will happen? I don't doubt that this developer has the intention to do that, but should there be another owner a month from now or a year from now, how do we ensure that the pavement will happen?
If I recall right, and Attorney Colling or Planner Josephson can correct me, I think we have that in the DA that the roads on this one need to be paved. I could be wrong, but I believe we codified that in the DA, that the interior roads need to be paved and approved by the county.
So what I'm hearing is if it wouldn't happen, we'd have to take action to enforce the DA.
Absolutely. I mean, it'd be like any other condition that we would normally have. We wouldn't issue right now we have the county that are looking at building permits, and that would be something that we would, they would submit the plans, they would come to us for a zoning compliance letter. We'd say that the roads have to be built before a permit should be issued or before a certificate of occupancy per the DA as part of the plat. That would be the process that I would envision for that.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Elkin.
in reference to the streets or the roads, they will meet county standards then, right? That's what you're saying, right? Yeah, I mean, it's within the ETZ.
Correct.
I don't know that I foresee the city annexing in this property. I want to just be assured that they meet the county road standards, that's all.
We don't have an urban road section proposed. I believe it's a 28-foot roadway with 3-foot deep ditches, I think is what we had proposed in our agreement.
Okay.
It would be a rural road section, but a hard surface on top of that instead of gravel. That would be
Right.
in the past.
Correct.
My continual concern in this regard is, with the plat being filed now, they'll be able to sell lots. And you could end up with 20 property owners up there and not the original developer involved. So I just want to make sure that we've got a way to enforce this paving thing.
Now, a suggestion that we could do, of course, it's all due diligence when somebody buys a lot. We could put in a note on the plat that says the interior roads need to be paved to county road standard, need to be hard surface in reference to the development agreement. That being said, if you probably didn't find a development agreement and be aware of that, you probably won't notice that on the plat as well. It's kind of almost the same thing. If you're going to do your due diligence, you would find it one way or the other. But we could make that note on the plat if you prefer. But a lot of it, there's only so much that we can do on notifying a prospective buyer. There's a portion of their responsibility to be aware of what the development responsibility is for that area.
Well, the other thing we could do is we could take some kind of financial guarantee. We've talked about that before, and that would absolutely assure it. It's the only thing I know of that would.
Mr. Elkin, you would like to see this fairly guaranteed that these
Yeah.
standards are met.
Exactly. I mean, we've seen other cases where the initial developer could not see the project in the end, and yet in the agreement that we had with the developer, it was a paved street, and I might as well it's BOE out there. The initial agreement with the initial developer was that would be a paved section of road. Never happened. They couldn't afford to see the project to the end, and of course, it still is not paved. It will be now at the county's expense. And I'd just like to be assured that this property or these properties are hard surfaced to county standards.
Maybe Mr. Colling wants to weigh in here, but again, I don't doubt the intention of this developer doing this, paving the streets. But I know things change, and this oil play and all of the activity is going to change as the months go by here. And it seems to me that we could do more than having to take legal action, having to sue somebody to get streets paved.
I agree. I share that same concern.
Mr. Colling, do you have an answer to that?
One of the things that is set forth in the development agreement is that a certificate of occupancy for any of these lots would not be issued until the street is paved. That has been historically in the county and the ETZ, that has been the hook that we have used in order to assure the pavement of streets within our ETZ. It's a little bit different now since the city is no longer issuing building permits or certificates of occupancy within the ETZ. The county has taken that over with their own building department and outsourcing that to their own consultants. So I think to make that work, we would need to work with the county. The county would be on board with that as well, that a certificate of occupancy would not be issued until that road was paved. I understand it's the county's intent that the road be paved as well, so I don't anticipate that would be a problem. What we do in order to let future property owners know of this arrangement is the development agreement is actually recorded against the property. So when lots are sold, that would come up in a title report. It is public notice to future property owners that development agreement exists out there and that obligation to pave the road does exist. That's the procedure we have followed in the past, and at least with properties in the ETZ, what we have anticipated following in the future.
I think everyone having a look at that is concerned with it should feel some comfort that that message is passed along and followed through, because we have developments where the roads are paved, curb and gutters put up, sewer, before the lots are sold or occupied. Even some people are doing a fantastic job. And I think that's what the city expects and the county expects. And I think for Mr. Colling to have a look at it, so there's more of an assurance that that's followed through prior to him or the county having to take some legal action. And this isn't aimed at you, Mr. Schrank, or your developer, but the issue is here. And I think the city is at an opportune time to make sure everything is followed through properly and very clearly with, it's the county and the city's development plans. So I would like to hear more comments if anyone has one, because I do feel it should be followed through with. That there's not going to be any ifs, and that we're not going to have this hanging over us, thinking that, well, a year or two from now, we're going to have someone asking the county to take legal action on a zoning issue that we recommended, and the county's going to be left up with a legal expense of trying to get it done. And the property owners are not going to look far enough to realize that the property they're purchasing has to have paved streets to the standard of the county. So, I mean, that's my comments. I'd like to see this, the assurance be almost there. There's not going to be a question down the road.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Schrank.
I think the difference with this property here is the development agreement. I don't know if the county has another subdivision that has a development agreement similar to this in place. I think that's the difference with this property, is the development agreement is really holding the developer accountable for this roadway, as Mr. Colling had stated. And the developer does have every intention of building this road. It may be phased out, where he does the first half of the road for lots to develop on the northern side and phases the rest as those lots come into place. But he does have every intention, and he actually started grading some of the roadway already. So his intentions are to build that road, and I believe the development agreement will hold him to it. So,
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Mr. Elkin.
And Gene, you remember the County Line subdivision, Susan Medley up there. They were required to pave the streets prior to building, and they did so. And they did a very nice job. I don't know if we can require that here. We had asked that they do that, and of course they did. I would like to see that happen prior to any development taking place within the subdivision.
and I believe that's what the development agreement spells out. As they had stated, it says prior to any, I don't know if it's certificate of occupancy or building permit, but one of the two is spelled out in the development agreement before those lots can be developed.
To answer your question, Commissioner Elkin, traditionally we've just done it at certificate of occupancy. If you put that condition, we've talked about that in times past of requiring developers to pave the road, but that gets to be such a considerable expense, and that slows things down. You'll have it from the developers that will say, we understand that, we'll work with the clients, but we need to have some flexibility. If you require that, then that will slow down development. And Commissioner Friedrich, if you want to comment with respect to that, that's a pretty big expense. That's fine if that's where you want to go, but I think we need to be consistent. And if that's the case, then say each of the developments, they need to do that. They need to have the roads paved before they can get a building permit. I feel comfortable that, as far as I know, we haven't had a situation in which a certificate of occupancy where we placed a condition, where it's noted, has went through the, has been not enforced. We overlooked. I'm not aware of a situation for that. The biggest problem that I face is a developer that will come in, develop the lot with the expectation with, or a property owner, somebody else other than the developer, will say, okay, I know, I have an arrangement, handshake, whatever the case is, that road will be built. They build their building, they do all their improvements, and then the developer is lagging behind. But that's an agreement between them and the developer. That's the biggest situation I've run into. And where, they have a construction loan and the developer's lagging or whatever, and it takes them a month or two, and then they have the cost of that before they can get converted over. That's the biggest issue I've had. I feel comfortable that if we just say that road has to be built through the extremity of that lot prior to certificate of occupancy, that we can make that work, even though it's not all done in-house. I mean, when they would come in, Forkscreen would, let's say they get a building permit, they would get our letter, a zoning compliance letter. Part of that would be that road has to be built before certificate of occupancy, and I would think that that the consulting firm would catch that as well. So I feel comfortable that it can be done.
I'm just looking at the East Industrial Park, and everything was done on a handshake basis, and of course that was flipped and flipped and flipped, and nothing was done as far as streets out there.
And I guess the difference between the two is that we have this in language compared to times past. And I agree with you. That's why I've, since I've started here, and we always talk about it, we need to make sure that if we have a particular condition that is codified somehow, some way in a development agreement, or it's a condition of approval. Otherwise, with the fast-paced environment that we go through, you could have all the best intentions in the world, and it could slip through just because of the development intensity that we do have.
Well, I think having the development agreement is a significant improvement in what we used to do. And I'm not saying that the street has to be built before a building permit application is approved or anything like that. I'm thinking about a bond, and a bond isn't perfect either, but it does give us something to go after. I think this is really kind of a county issue. If the county is comfortable leaving it this way, then I guess we go ahead. But my worry again is that you get 75% of the lots sold, and now there's not as much incentive to pave that street anymore. Again, acknowledging the intentions that this developer has. But if he gets the right offer, he could sell it all in a couple months. But maybe that's something you guys want to talk about, Jay, and I think it would be easy to require a bond.
Mr. Jackson, I believe the development agreement does spell out security if the road is not constructed, per City Code 3460. That is stated in Section 3 of the Development Agreement, Assurance of Infrastructure Completion. If it's not completed prior to development being approved, the owner will post sufficient security to assure the completion of that roadway. So I believe that is addressed in the development agreement as well.
Is that something we expect to enforce then?
That's in our subdivision regulations. We haven't gone to that point yet. I mean, like we talked about when we went through our subdivision regulations, we would kind of walk our way through that process. We didn't want to go from nothing to all of a sudden now you as a developer that purchased the land, you've got to do all these things. So we've been slowly etching up that. Not to shift the conversation, but that's exactly what we're going to talk about in our work session. And I think that's the topic of, should we move it up more of a notch? If we're going to do a final plat, should we require a bond for those roads before we do that? Then we have the assurance that it's going to be done, or not. We haven't done that in the past. We have it in our code. If we're not going to do it, then a recommendation would be that we modify that particular language. So I just think that the topic is spot on. We're going to address that a little bit later, and I'll leave that up to you which way you want to go. If you want to require a bond, from staff's perspective, that's great, and we know it's going to be there. But we try to have a balancing act. We get criticized for being too lenient by one party and overbearing by the other, and we're trying to have a balanced approach, and we're actually looking for your direction as well. So,
Who enforces the, development issues? Who is the enforcer within the ETZ? Is it the county or is it the city?
well, right now, that's a good question. It would depend on who would have the authority for that. For the most part, I would say most of them are going to be for the city because it's going to be a planning or a zoning or a subdivision issue. However, there may be a specific condition that refers specifically to the county. Let's say this condition needs to be approved by Al Heiser or something of that nature, or it's strictly a building issue and it's the building, then it'd be the county at this point. But the vast majority of them would be that way, right now through the city. The only other one that jumps off would probably be stormwater related issues that are still under the purview of the county.
Mr. Chairman, I'd really like to hear from Steve Josephson. He happens to be the county planner as well. Any thoughts on this, Steve?
Mr. Josephson?
Steve Josephson, city planner, and Commissioner Elkin, your question being in terms of the enforcement of this?
Well, not in terms of the enforcement, but development agreements, and how can we be assured that they follow through with, say they only sell, I think Mr. Jackson brought up 75% or even 50%, it becomes some of a cost-bearing factor in whether or not they pave that street.
Yes, understood. I had talked to the city attorney about this, whether or not the agreement would assure that this would be paved, and it was his opinion. It was his opinion that it would be. There is also a condition in the development agreement that says that the certificates of occupancy would not be issued until the infrastructure with all infrastructure within the development is completed. So I think the situation we're worried about is that somebody's going to get their CO and it's going to be onto a piece of road that hasn't been completed and paved. And that is part of the development agreement, that they can't issue the COs until all the infrastructure in the subdivision is finished.
Mr. Colling?
And if I could follow up on that as well, because of the changeover with the county taking over issuance of building permits within the ETZ, that includes certificates of occupancy, it would be up to the county to enforce that requirement. I think there would have to be some coordination between city staff and county staff regarding that, so that they're aware of the development agreement, that Forsgren, the county consulting firm, is aware of the development agreement, but it would be a county enforcement issue once that certificate of occupancy is applied for.
Yes, I think what I would envision is somebody comes in for a permit, and of course we're going to do a field check on that at that property and see, has the road there been completed or not? Is that part of any agreement between the buyer and seller as to who is going to complete that roadway? And they're not going to get their permit until the road is completed, until there's a serviceable road that's paved and meets the county standards. Otherwise, you would have a lot in the subdivision being served by substandard infrastructure. And it's not just going to apply to roads. It'll apply to any other requirements such as any drainage and stormwater requirements too.
So you're comfortable with the agreement that
I'm comfortable with it. What I would like to see, though, is the suggestion that Mr. Corton had of at least putting a note on the final plat, on the final plat, so at least it's out there saying that all roads will be paved and, will be paved and constructed to, constructed to county standards, just constructed to the standards as listed in the development agreement. So there may be a way on the plat itself to tie it back to the development agreement.
Mr. Colling, I had a question while we're on this. How much does bonding affect good intentions? And are you familiar with, many issues come to the point where the city or counties trying to collect to get something paid for?
Not sure I quite understand the question. I think, as was noted, we do have the ability within our subdivision code to require a bond or some other security for the completion of infrastructure. We have done that in some limited circumstances, and if it's the commission's desire, we can do that in this agreement as well. That is a matter of your discretion. As Mr. Josephson stated, I think as city staff, we're comfortable with the agreement as it's drafted, but if the commission has a different opinion, if you'd like to require a bond or some other financial security, we can certainly propose that to the developer.
Thank you, Mr. Colling. Mr. Joseph, thank you. Any other questions or comments at this time?
I
Yes,
guess,
Mr. Frederick.
as a builder, I'm not a big fan of holding up certificate of occupancies. I mean, I'd rather see us hold up permitting in the front, because a lot of times you have a third-party builder building for the property for somebody, and that could hold up their final closing or whatever in payment. So I'm not a big fan of certificate of occupancies getting held up. I don't think there should be a permit issued up front until their proper infrastructure is there. And I've developed some property in the past. I just believe that that infrastructure should be in place before anything happens. And it's just my thoughts on it.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you.
I have to agree with Jason. I think the infrastructure should be there before any development takes place. But does that, Jason, hold up the development of a particular project of this size?
I suppose it might if they're not financially able to complete it up front. I just don't see why you would approve a development to a developer that's not financially able to develop the property as they want to right away. I mean, they should phase it then, and they only have a half a dozen lots for sale in the first phase, and the second phase another half a dozen or whatever it is. But that's my total feeling. I think the infrastructure should be in place or before building permits even issued. So,
would bonding be a good avenue to assure this?
I guess it's another avenue, but then if they don't do it, you're in the legal part of it again. Where if you don't issue building permits, there's no legal issue there.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Colling.
I appreciate the discussion, and I think, as Mr. Corton indicated, it's part of what we're trying to do through the workshop session that's upcoming. And it's a difficult issue for city staff to deal with. We have a couple of developers that are coming forward with or seeking final plat approval at the next commission meeting next week. And as city staff, I think we get an enormous amount of pressure to get those developments, those final plats put through in a timely basis. Once the plat's through, then we get a greater amount of pressure to issue building permits. And once building permits are issued, there's an even greater pressure that gets put on city staff regarding certificates of occupancy. And it's a difficult issue for city staff to deal with because we're regulators of the development, but we're also charged with the task of trying to get these projects in the ground and approve them for the benefit of the city. And And I think it's a difficult issue for us to deal with. What we've tried to do is craft development agreements to meet some of these issues. And I can tell you in conversations that I think Mr. Corton has had with developers and I've had with developers, once we begin requesting security, it's another financial outlay for a developer, and it's another financial commitment where they have to tie money up, which makes development more expensive. And I think we already get some pushback from developers that city regulations are already too expensive or already too onerous in getting some of these projects in the ground. So that balancing act is really difficult for us to understand what this commission's desires are with respect to that, as well as the city commission.
Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman,
Mr. Coleman.
you know, I really appreciate what Mr. Colling just said. I can only imagine what happens in this building a lot of times. I think that an industrial subdivision in the ETZ is a lot different than, say, a residential development in town. From a marketing standpoint, there are a lot of buyers that care less if the streets were paved. They'll buy these lots and they'll develop them and be just fine with it. It's us that are saying no from a quality of place issue, or however you want to say that. We think these streets should be paved. In town, that's not going to happen. They've got to pave streets to make them marketable. You know, there could be problems in town too, but much less likely than there would be in the ETZ with an industrial subdivision. So I think, and you know, again, a lot of this I think we should be deferring to the county, but I think this is very different than things we have within city limits.
There is a difference, and I agree with the comment about the county. I think this wording should be probably based on what Mr. Alcom would like to hear, I believe, because I think the county's going to have a big plan. That's what they would like to see.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Schrank.
just to expand a little further into our development agreement here, we do have spelled out a phasing plan or a portion of a phasing plan in the development agreement. That comment was brought up. The developer will be required to construct the first 800 feet off of 32nd Street Southwest within the 18 months after approval. The reason for that is to allow him to market those first 4 lots, I believe. If he can get those lots sold, that'll help pay for the remainder of the road. He also has lots 1 through 3 in the northwest corner that would require no improvements at all other than approach. So to hold those building permits up would really limit his funding to construct this road as well. So that's his intention, is use some of these first sales, get a first portion of the road built. As he sells these lots, he would construct the remaining portions and hold up certificate of occupancies for any further lots until that road is constructed. The development agreement also spells out that that first 800 feet must be constructed prior to building permit approval. Any additional roadways must be completed prior to certificate of occupancy. So.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. Any other comments or questions at this time? Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
This time I'd ask if there's anyone in the public who would like to make comment on this final plat. Please feel free to come to the podium. Any other comments from the commission? Mr. Josephson, would you like to make any further comments or recommendation?
Steve Josephson, city planner. The recommendation of staff is for approval, and as Mr. Schrank said, when the developer approached the county about this for the replat, there were some rezonings in the replat of this. They did make the intent known that they wish to phase the project so that that only certain lots would be, as Mr. Schrank said, only certain lots would be sold, and the roadway would need to be, and other infrastructure would need to be installed, before any development took place on those lots. And that phasing plan is captured within the development agreement. So I am here to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions at this time for Mr. Josephson?
Thank you.
Thank you. This time, we'll close the public portion of this hearing, and I'd ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Committee recommend approval of the final subdivision plat for the Great Lakes First Subdivision replat as depicted in the application materials as meeting all the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code and also being in the interest of the public health, safety, and welfare.
Is there a second to that motion? Been a second by Mr. Riddick. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Jackson.
you know, we're a long ways into this plat, and you know, I'm going to vote in favor of the motion, but I really think we need to look at this whole issue, and I think we need to get some input from the county as to what the county would like to see. It does sound like this development agreement has been carefully crafted and all. I'm just worried about the enforcement of it. Maybe I'm more worried than I need to be, but I think we have to really rethink our policy in this regard.
Mr. Elkin, are you comfortable with this?
You know, at this time, enforcement's always been an issue in the county. It is. I mean, we do not really have a true enforcer in place, and somebody to go out and look at these projects on a daily basis to make sure that things are following through. You know, maybe with what we're doing as far as the permitting with the outside firm, maybe that'll happen. But it all boils down to our state's attorney really enforcing the issue. Does it not, Matt?
Yes, I think that's correct. I think one thing that may be beneficial for us as city staff, as well as you bring on your consulting firm that is going to be issuing permits within the ETZ, to have a conversation with city staff and us talk with them. I think there's going to be some coordination that's going to have to happen between city subdivision and zoning regulations, and then the enforcement of the building code side of it. And I think we'd appreciate that conversation with the county personnel.
And I do believe that'll happen.
Commissioner Elkin, I could let you know that Friday we have a meeting with Forkscreen to discuss that, to make sure that to make sure they understand the role that the city will be playing. We understand their role, try to coordinate the permitting of it, the checklist, to make and so forth. So I have all confidence that we should be able to work out that. We do have that meeting on Friday, so I could let you know how things go if you prefer. But Steve will be there as well.
Any other discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Recommended. Thank you, Mr. Schrank. Item 4 on our regular agenda is a preliminary plat. It's to consider a public safety center preliminary plat generally located in the northwest quadrant of State Avenue and 21st Street West. The site is approximately 9 acres. At this time, I'd ask the party presenting this preliminary plat. Please feel free to come forward.
Thank you. Andrew Schrank with Highlands Engineering and Surveying. This is the plat for the new Public Safety Center. This is just a one-lot subdivision for that building. I will be dedicating right-of-way on the northern portion of this property line, 33 feet of right-of-way. And that was a request from landowners to the west and the north to provide future expansion to those areas. We'll also be dedicating 75 feet of right-of-way for State Avenue, for the construction of State Avenue. The plan is there actually is current plans for the reconstruction of State Avenue that will be providing water and sewer to this area. There is a significant amount of floodplain and wetlands on the southern portion of this site, and we'll be addressing those through our design as we proceed with building permit. We will be mitigating any wetlands that are impacted, as well as relocating that floodplain as needed, and we'll go through all the FEMA and Army Corps applications required for that. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Any questions at this time from Mr. Schrank? Mr. Schrank, I did have a question on water runoff, erosion control, and the wetlands. How much responsibility does the city have in this, as far as if something isn't done right as far as water runoff, erosion, acts of God, whatever, in making sure that the other property owners aren't affected?
Through the building permit application, as well as the plating application, we submit stormwater reports to city, and those will address our erosion control plans. If the city has any issues with that, they will comment and let us know. Also, during construction, whenever you disturb more than an acre of land, you're required to submit a stormwater pollution and prevention plan to the Department of Health. That as well will spell out any erosion control measures you're taking. As far as runoff goes, we'll be submitting the application to FEMA to revise any floodplain issue that we impact. The city also reviews those, it has their governing agency review those applications as well for approval. So the city's going to be very involved in all this process as far as runoff and erosion control goes.
Now, when you submit these plans to all the different organizations, whether it's FEMA, Department of Health, how much review or what do these people actually do? I mean, you did your requirement by submitting a plan,
Mhm.
and then you wait for an approval, or is it the fact you submitted the plan good enough, you followed your part?
We do receive comments from those agencies. Many times the city will give us comments. A lot of times it is on erosion control, as well as FEMA. They'll look at all of our calculations that we've done, as well as the methods that we're using to convey that stormwater. So we do receive comments. It's not just a submittal and it goes away. With the stormwater pollution prevention plan, that is submitted to the Department of Health. We do not receive comments on those. However, they can come to the site and do inspections if they want to, and address fines if the stormwater pollution prevention plan is not being taken care of. Those plans require that they inspect all their erosion control measures after rain events, as well as periodically. So it makes sure they address the site during construction, not just in the planning stages as well. So if there are issues, they'll get addressed through that document as well.
Okay. So who's responsible then? The developer, the builder, the guy that moved the dirt, or the city, or the property owner? Who's responsible to take care of the fine or correct something that's done improperly?
Typically, we'll prepare the initial design of the erosion control measures. If something happens and it's found that that design wasn't adequate, it's typically up to the contractor through that SWIP to make those necessary changes. It could also be that the city does an inspection on the site. I believe there is some plans to start doing more city inspections as well. The city may notice some of the erosion control issues during their inspections as well, and could request some updates at that time.
And do you know how enforceable those regulations are? I mean,
I would probably default to city staff on that one. I'm not sure if they've ran into that issue or not.
Mr. Chairman, it's similar to the other issue we talked about building infrastructure. It's an enforcement issue again. And the health department, yeah, like Mr. Schrank said, they can come out periodically and visit any site that has an open permit. In those cases, the permit is typically a joint permittee, the contractor and the owner as joint applicants. As far as the cities would be concerned, we would probably go after the property owner. Contractors can change, developers can change. All we have is really who owns that property, who owns the ground. So our permit would be with the property owner, I would believe. Whereas the health department would go, the contractor holds that permit typically during construction. But health department visits are rare, and in the past, the city inspections have been kind of on a complaint basis.
Mr. Coling, could I ask you on that? How enforceable are those, or have you seen anybody trying to enforce a issue with erosion or water runoff? And are the fines significant to take care of a problem?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know I have the direct answer to your question. We do have the ordinances within our code that we could use to enforce stormwater issues. Best of my recollection, I don't think we have gone to litigation on a stormwater issue over the last probably 5 to 7 years at least. That authority exists out there, and historically, traditionally, if there are problems, we can generally address those without litigation and get voluntary compliance from landowners. I'm not aware that we've done it through a court order in the past.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. Any other questions or comments at this time for Mr. Schrank? Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Schrank. This time I'd ask if there's anyone in the public who would like to make comment on this preliminary plat, feel free to come to the podium and state us your name, address, and we'd like to hear your comments.
Good morning. I'm Dean Kubis. I just live right across where this emergency center is going to be. I have no problem with the center being there or anything. My concern is the sirens. Is there any way that can be controlled? So I mean, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, we got sirens blaring by our house or anything?
You know, Mr. Kubis, I think, maybe Mr. Corton can answer it, but we also have our fire chief here.
Yeah, we have the fire chief, and I could ask Mr. Sivak to talk about that. Pretty much that is regulated by emergency policies and by standard procedures. I mean, there's certain times that you can do it, but certain emergencies you have to do it. That is just the nature of the beast. There's a benefit that you have that it's across the street, but
Right,
sirens and the rest are going to be potentially part of it. And when that happens and the rest, I'll leave that up to if fire chief could come up here and just kind of talk about, when that would normally be the case. But I've lived next to them. It's part of it. It's one of those uses that you want whenever you have a heart attack or an emergency. But on an ongoing basis, it is something that can impact it. But overall, it's a benefit for that area, and it's desperately needed for the entire west side. So I'll let Fire Chief talk about it behind you, Mr. Kubik.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, to address Mr. Kubas's question, Dean, we're only going to blow the sirens if we know you're at home. It's a good question, and I know it's a concern for anyone that lives around a emergency facility like the Public Safety Center. The sirens, the intent of the sirens is to move traffic, is to make traffic aware of the situation and to move it. At 2 in the morning with little or no traffic to move, the response procedure would be the emergency lights, but not the sirens. We try to, through protocol, as Mr. Corton mentioned, through protocol and departmental procedures, and I'm sure it would be the same for the police department, if the traffic is there, the sirens are necessary. If you have a wide open street and minimal or no traffic, still your emergency lights will be on, but there's no reason for the sirens. And can you guarantee that 100% of the time all responses will follow that protocol? Well, I can't guarantee that, but that is the intent, that is the protocol. That is how we'd rather operate. Why blow the sirens if you don't need to? Why use the sirens if you don't need to? They're for that specific purpose. So,
Mr. Sivak, do you know, are there any intentions in putting, in a lot of locations in other cities, they have lights that are triggered by the emergency department that will stop traffic on the road that the vehicle is going to go onto. Ensures that that vehicle has clear traffic so it can move out of the building and go where it wants to unimpeded.
that's definitely part of our plan, definitely part of the process.
Any other comments or questions for Mr. Sivak at this time? Appreciate your comment.
Thank you.
Thank you. This time I'd ask if there's anyone else who'd like to make comment on this preliminary plat. Please feel free to come forward.
Hi, I'm Jan Perkel, and I'm a neighbor also. And I have the same concerns as Dean does, but I understand this is necessary, and we want it here. But, we are concerned about the sirens, and we'd like cooperation with the departments to consider our situation out there. And as you probably all know, we have horses out there, and they will be outside right up against this, and they can be spooked and hurt by this. So it's not just convenience, it's our horses being damaged by somebody, And Dean's horse just recently became blind, so he has a blind horse out there too. So, it's sort of a touchy situation for us. And the fire department got up and spoke, but as I understand, this isn't just a fire department, this is a police department also, and we want to know that the police aren't going to be screaming out. You know, you look at the frequency of the fire being called is going to be probably fairly low compared to how often the police department is going to be coming in and out of there. I guess I'm more concerned about the police department than the fire department and their sirens. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Perko.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, if I may make another comment. Good concerns and valuable concerns from the part of the people living around there, obviously. But another thing to keep in mind, whether the Public Safety Center would be located at this particular location or a quarter mile or a half a mile away, the nature of State Avenue and how it's going to develop and what it's going to be is going to mean that that emergency traffic is going to be on that road. That's going to be a primary main route for us to the developments that are happening and that have happened up there and that are happening around there. Fire trucks, emergency vehicles, police trucks, ambulances, they're going to be on State Avenue anyway, regardless of where the Public Safety Center is located, just by the nature of what State Avenue is going to be. And so, you know, the people that have the animals there that are concerned about it, it's a concern that'll happen no matter what. And you know, it deserves the discussion, obviously, but State Avenue is going to be a main route, main emergency route. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Siva. Is there anyone else who would like to make comment on this preliminary plat? Please feel free to come forward. Anyone else from the commission wish to make comment? Being none at this time, I'd ask if the city would like to make a recommendation.
I believe the city would recommend approval on that.
Thank you, Mr. Corton. This time we'll close the public portion of this hearing, and I would ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of the Public Safety Building Addition preliminary plat as depicted in Exhibit A, as meeting all the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code and also being in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare.
Thank you, Mr. Kovash. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Elkin. Any discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried to recommend. Thank you very much. Item 5 on our agenda is an adjournment, but after this adjournment that I think will take place, we are probably going to have a work session. So at this time, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
Also move.
A motion adjourned. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Meeting adjourned.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Corton.
At the next meeting, I think it'd probably be wise that with Mr. Tews no longer, our vice chair, no longer on the board, that we would need to select a vice chair to be able to officiate, be able to conduct the meetings in your absence. So I would think that next meeting we need to have an election for that. So members, you might want to think about who you may nominate with respect to a vice chair.
Where am I going?
What's that?
So where do you expect me to go?
Well, twice this year you've been on vacation, so it happens.
Thank you, Mr. Corton.
I don't have a plot 6 feet deep underneath, next to my window, so don't worry about that.
So that will be on the agenda for next month. So at this time, with consensus here, we are going to do a workshop. This ran a little longer than I thought, but it still went fairly fast. So, and as we had agreed before, those who would like to stay or those who would like to have this work session on the subdivisions, that's what we're going to do now. Mr. Corton, would you like to?
I will turn that over to Craig Kubis, who will talk about policies and procedures, and we'll talk about some proposed amendments to the subdivision regs that we have addressed, and we can go from there. if you like, if you want to take just a 5-minute break, refill your coffee, and then we can convene for that, would that be inappropriate?
That sounds really good.